Welcome back. The special session on public safety was called in response to the Covenant school shooting that claimed 6 innocent lives, 3 children and 3 adults. Covenant parents were a force behind legislation they hoped would win passage and keep their children safe. But they ran into political reality, the power of the gun lobby, a wall against red flag laws or gun reform legislation. Their eyes were opened at the inaction of lawmakers. 5 months after the horror of the mass shooting of children and adults at the Covenant school. 5 months after the heroic effort of Metro police officers to stop the shooter. 5 months later, and little has changed.
Assembly of the State of Tennessee, now extraordinary session.
Special session on public safety was called as a result of the Covenant tragedy. But once started, the session was highlighted by new rules to limit audience size, a ban on signs, limitations about who can speak, when, and how, and inaction on the issue of gun violence. It's that inaction and an impasse between the House and Senate that has surprised and infuriated Covenant parents.
We are now caught in the middle of a Cold War between the House and the Senate at the cost of our family's dignity. We have the potential for safer, brighter schools and communities for our children, but that takes boldness from our elected officials to speak out for what is right. They have to choose sanctity of life for all of our children over the loud voices of firearm associations. They have to choose listening to teachers who we brought to them, who shared brutal details of what it took to save the lives of children on March 27th, over the fear-mongering that the gun lobbyists are pushing. As an elected leader, you have a choice. You can speak out against harmful rhetoric meant to induce fear into constituents. You can speak up for the Covenant parents who spent 5 months with you, sharing and reliving the trauma of March 27th over and over again, so you could understand the devastation this mass shooting has caused. Our children prayed face to face with these representatives for change. They are watching. We are watching. Do not choose inaction.
3 adults and 3 children were brutally murdered in the Covenant school shooting, while others hid, traumatized, praying for their lives.
Watch out, watch out.
They suffered unthinkable trauma as they heard gunshots resounding throughout their school. In the last 5 months, we have been galvanized to advocate on behalf of all children and families in Tennessee. We have done so with the hopes of real change that would help us from these senseless and fully preventable acts of gun violence. Unfortunately, as we stand here today, we see that many of our elected leaders, particularly in the Senate, have done nothing other than prove they are incapable of the job they have been called to do. Despite having weeks to coalesce around the agenda, these grown men and women have decided to leave their playground and go home, leaving us, the citizens of Tennessee, the victims of violent crimes, waiting on the sidelines and carrying both their emotional and financial baggage at $58,000 a day. Set your differences aside and do your jobs. We will remember who stood up for their constituents and not their own self-interests when it's time to vote and when it's time to primary. If we are forced to continue bearing witness to this childish stalemate, we also will call on our fellow Tennesseans to remember the egregious lack of leadership and vote accordingly next year.
Covenant parents feel they are not being represented as they were told they would be.
Unfortunately, out of frustration, far too many sane and reasonable people have chosen not to participate in the political process, leaving only those angry and on the extremes to decide who will represent us. And so, here we find ourselves with a legislature that seems broken and unable to talk to itself. We are not called to live our lives in fear. The Apostle Paul reminds us that perfect love casts out fear. our elected representatives are governing out of fear. Fear of not being reelected, fear of being criticized, fear of the sign. I don't completely understand those fears. And by their inaction, they sure as hell don't understand the fears that our children felt on March 27th, or the fear that every parent feels in a state where gun violence is the leading cause of death amongst our children. This must change.
These Covenant parents feel insulted and ignored.
Our families came here last week fully expecting to work together with the legislature to make progress towards a safer Tennessee. We are here on behalf of all the children in Tennessee and want the lawmakers to know we are here for their children and their grandchildren too. While we did feel the support of some, we were also mansplained, interrogated, silenced, kicked out of meetings, and insulted by callous remarks. However, today, the biggest insult to us is the fact that the Senate is refusing to take up the bills we have worked so hard with House leadership to get passed, including the autopsy bill. This lack of action is a choice they are making and speaks volumes about their lack of compassion and their priority of personal agendas over the people of Tennessee, even their own Republican constituents, including myself. On that note, I would like to speak directly to the Senate leadership. Listen closely. The shooter confronted our children with guns, but now you are stabbing our families and all Tennesseans in the back. What you are doing by not taking up these bills is shameful and inhumane. You are elected by the people and have chosen to shatter our expectations by doing nothing.